Hi there, my name's Bruce Rain from Breakers Creations, and in this video we're going to investigate why a recapped Mac LC580 still doesn't work. So one of my customers has sent me this Macintosh LC580 logic board, which they have attempted to recap themselves. Now this is obviously something that I strongly encourage. The whole purpose of doing these videos is to teach people how to do their own recapping. Now after he recapped it, it still didn't work. So he sent it to me to try and figure out what the problem is. And so he wants me to check over his work to make sure that there aren't any faults in the actual recapping, but then also to find out why it won't work. Okay, so this is the board under the microscope, and the first thing I can see, this is one of the replaced capacitors, and I can see that there's a little bit too much solder going on either side here. You've got quite large blobs here and here. That to me is an indication there probably wasn't enough flux being used, so that's made it all blob up rather than being nice smooth joints. Having said that, looking at this here, I don't really see any reason why this wouldn't work. I'm sure it's still making contact. I can double check, but I don't think that is the problem. We've got the same here with this one. It's difficult to see with the microscope, but this is actually not on flat. It's actually sticking up on one side. But once again, it does appear to be making contact. I mean, short of there actually being a little short or a bridge in there somewhere, I don't really see that that's a problem. So looking at all of these replaced capacitors, here are a couple more here, I'm basically seeing the same thing. Once again, too much solder, but really I don't see any reason that they wouldn't work. But as I look around this board, I do see something else a little bit disturbing. I see quite a lot of this kind of dusty, smeary, leaky capacitor type junk. And if we look as we get further up here in particular, so there are a group of capacitors up here. Once again, these are the ones that have been replaced. Joints a little bit better here, a little bit less solder being used. But here's the sound chip, and you can see there's quite a bit of gunge all around here. So my general thought is that the problem with this is almost definitely just going to be some corrosion, you know, some of this leaky gunk all around here. So I think probably the main thing this one is going to need is a really, really good clean before we attempt to fire it up again. And you can see all this dust and stuff all around here. Now there is also something else which I am a little bit disturbed about. This is over here near where the battery was. And first of all, let's zoom out here and have a look at the COM slot. And look at all of that green scungy stuff going on in here. So there's a huge amount of corrosion going on there. And then if I zoom down here, you can see that there. See, this is that's all corrosion going on there. And so once again, I mean, having said that, as I scrape this off, it does appear that everything is still together. I don't think there's anything there that would, you know, in terms of a break. This part here, this looks exciting. Let me just grab my scalpel here, because that's a trace running underneath all that corrosion. So let's get a scalpel here and we'll scrape some of this away and see the condition of this trace underneath. And that, my friends, is pretty bloody bad. Okay, it's going to keep scraping away here. Ultimately, what I always want with these is I want to scrape away until I have nothing but bright, shiny copper. And I don't think I'm going to get that, because right there, I think we've probably corroded all the way through the trace. So we're definitely going to need a repair here, no doubt about that. So that could well be the reason for the deadness of this computer. Okay, so obviously we've got a trace that we need to repair here. We've got a lot of cleaning that needs to be done to get rid of a lot of that corrosion, and I'm also going to go in and try and neaten up these capacitors, try and get rid of some of that excess solder, because I just sort of well, I mean, if this person's sending this to me to do it, then I'm going to do a nice job. Alright, so let's start off. I think probably the easiest thing to do will be to grab a little bit of wick and get rid of some of that excess solder. And I'll probably just put this capacitor down again. There's my solder wick. There we go. Get rid of that. Let's do the same on the other side. Actually, while I'm on this side, I'll do this bit here too. Do that one. There we go. Then I'm going to flip the board around and wick away the other side. Clean that up there. Get a little bit more solder off. There we go. Right, so I've actually got that component off now. And I'll do the same with this one. There we go. Right, so let's take those two components off, and then we'll do my normal trick whenever I'm doing recapping, is to make sure we get these pads clean and spotless. And I'm just going to get my little scraper again, because I just see more corrosion here. I just want to have a look at these without the corrosion on them and make sure that they look like they're all still working. Yeah, now as I expose that copper, I'm still confident that that is making contact with the via going through to the other side. So I think that's fine. I mean, look, it's rusted, sure, but I still think it's working. So I can basically clean that up, get a bit of coating over it, and that should be fine. That should arrest any further corrosion. And then, as I say, so we get our flux. As I say, I don't think this person was using any flux other than the flux in the solder. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why they're getting those great big blobby solder joints. There we go. But as I say, I think this person will be quite pleased to know that despite whatever sort of, however those joints look, I think they still would work fine. And I suspect that the reason why this is dead is because of that broken trace. So let's just clean that up. Get all of the solder off it. So we've just got left nice shiny pads like that. And we get some isopropyl alcohol and a Q-tip, cotton bud. Clean that up. If you have a look here, you can see this has been dug out a little bit here. However, I don't think that was a trace. I think that's maybe just a little bit heavy-handed, perhaps, in getting the old capacitor off. So I don't think that is any cause for alarm. And then this one here. Now, the more I look at this and think, and looking at the proximity of the corrosion we have here, I am feeling compelled to remove this kind of Velcro-y type plastic thing that the battery would normally sit on. This computer would normally have a little square 4.5 volt battery that sits on this. And this is kind of glued to the board. And the fact that there's all this corrosion around the edges worries me about whether there might be some corrosion underneath this thing. You know, I mean, look at where that corrosion is there right next to this thing here. So I think what I'll probably do is lift this off just to make sure I can see what the state of the traces underneath it are. So I'm just going to do that now. Okay, well, I've taken that thing off. Still got a little bit of sticky snotty stuff hanging around here, but on the bright side it all looks pretty good underneath. So I am not really concerned about that at all. So I should, of course, given the fact that I've got this here, I mean, one thing I should do, of course, is just check and see whether we have continuity here. So I'm going to grab my little multimeter that goes beep, like that. That's how it goes. It goes beep. And I'm going to put one, I'll put it there, and a little bit of exposed copper there, and then I'll put it there. And that, that is a very good demonstration of lack of continuity, because I'm not getting any beep. That's a beep. That's a no beep. So there's no doubt about the fact that we have got broken copper along here. So as I say, I suspect that is the most likely cause of our grief. Okay, so we've got our cleaned up pads here now, and I'm going to put these caps on using my neat and tidy technique. Once again, absolutely no criticism of the person who had a go at doing this themselves. I encourage it. You have to learn how to do it somehow, and I can tell you that the very first recapping I did all those years ago looked awful, and I went back and redid it some years later because it was so embarrassing to look at. So just always keep in mind that you have to start somewhere. Okay, so let's pop that cap on, try and get him as straight as possible. Whoop, let's try and get it in camera as well, and maybe even in focus. There's such high demands. Alright, put that there. And solder. Whoopsie. See, the pressure's on now. I've got to make sure I do a really tidy job seeing as I'm redoing this. If I'm redoing someone else's work, there's got to be an expectation that what I end up doing is really neat and tidy. Okay. And let's do this one. Flux. And I just need to remove some of the old solder from these capacitors. I see no reason to not reuse these capacitors. They don't look like they've been mistreated or anything like that. I'm sure they'll still function. But grab some solder on the soldering iron here. But I do need to get some of the old solder off before I put them back. That's interesting. This one here is a little bit mangled. So I'm just going to grab some pliers and just try and bend this back into shape like that. There we go. There we go. There we go. Look at that. That's looking fine. Alright, so I've done one side of those two, then I'll flip the board around and I'll do the other side. Okay, here we go. Second side, bit more solder. There we go. And there we go. Nice and neat. Looks pretty. No complaints. A little bit too much solder on this side, but I won't tell if you don't. Alright, so that's those two capacitors done. Now I'm going to go and do that exact same thing with the rest. I don't see any reason to submit you to that whole thing. But what I will do is I will just quickly demonstrate the repairing of this trace. Now, what I need to do is I need to attach a new wire up here and then just run it down here, down to there. Now, the main complication I have here is I'm jammed right in between these two ports. It's got the slots, the COM slot and the PDS slot here. So it's a little bit crammed. I think we should still be okay. Right, so I'm just using my scalpel to expose some of that copper, and then I'm going to place some flux onto that, and then I'll get my soldering iron and very carefully, without melting anything, I'm going to put some solder onto the copper, just like that. So we now have solder on the copper, and then I'm going to get my repair wire, which if you've seen any of my other videos will know that I use an enameled wire, which is the same sort of wire that you would have for an electromagnet or a transformer. It is insulated, but that insulation comes off very easily with the soldering iron. So I cut off a little length of that, and I will just grab my tweezers and I'll plonk that approximately where I want it to be. Doesn't need to be exact, because I will get more exact when it actually comes time. Right, next step is a reasonably liberal coating of flux. Get some solder onto the soldering iron, like this. Then hold this in position. I'm going to bring this around a little bit if I can, just so I can hold this. And I want to position that like that, there. And then melt that. As I'm melting the coating off this wire. There we go. So that is now soldered onto that bit of trace there. And then grab some more solder to do the other side. Just going to put that there and melt that. There we go. Right, so that looks like a nice tidy join. Pretty happy with that. Not happy with the lack of focus, but you know. Right, so then I'm going to cut off the excess just like this. Boom. Grab my tweezers to pull that excess off. There we go. Right, so now we need to check and see if we have managed to restore some continuity here. So I am going to do that by getting my little thing that goes beep. And I'll put one here. And I'll put one here. And that's a noise. If we run it all the way back here. There it is. So that has allowed us to restore that continuity there, and that will need to be sort of cleaned up, and it will need to be coated so to help protect it so that it doesn't get damaged in the future. But that is one repaired trace, so that's quite good. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through each one of these capacitors. I'm going to take off the old one, or take off the capacitor, clean up the pads a little bit, put it back on with a little less solder, and then it will be a matter of cleaning and then testing. Okay, so during the removal process of this one, I have managed to bend this pad. So this is a pad that's joined here and then joined here. So I am going to have to do a little bit of trickery to get these all looking good again. But when I'm finished, you'll never know. Just keeping in mind, of course, that these pads do get very easily weakened, and so don't do what I just did. Now, of course, having said that, that could have been busted before as part of the original recapping process. I'll have to go back and review the video footage to see if that's the case. And so that could have actually already been broken. We'll see. And that could also be one of the reasons why this didn't work. So I've done pad repair before, and as I have explained in my pad repair video, when I am repairing pads, I do them in a very case-by-case basis. I don't necessarily have a particular procedure that I do for all of them. Okay, we've got this lifted pad now. Whether that was done by me or whether it was done by the owner of this board who capped it himself, it doesn't really matter. The end result is the same, and that is we need to fix it. So first thing I'm going to do is attach the new capacitor. It is we've got one pad which is fine, and that's where we're going to get the bulk of our strength from. So I'm going to put that on there, and it makes sense to do the good side first. So I'm just going to flip this around so I can get a bit of slightly better angle at it. Flip it, there we go. Just like that, and I will attach that there. So we're getting good foundation on that side. Now we'll flip it back around to this side again, and we'll attach some solder there, and that'll actually make it pretty solid. There we go. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to grab our little multimeter, bip bip, and first of all we're going to check to make sure that we've got continuity from here to here. Sorry, the focus changes. One of the really annoying things about these boards is they've got these little springy bits that stick out that are for grounding, and it means that the board doesn't sit flat here. So every time I push it down, the focus changes. So let me do that. All right, so let's put that there and there. Okay, we've got continuity between those two, but we also need continuity between here and here. Oh, well, there you go. Look at that. It has actually managed to make contact just by a bit of solder getting on it. Now, having said that, I'm still not content with that. I would much rather go in and add a little wire here just to be safe, because who knows, that could move and maybe it won't make contact anymore. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to scrape a little bit here, scrapey, like that, and then I'm going to get some flux on it, and then I'm going to get some solder on it. This is all going to be seeming very familiar. There we go. Then I'm going to get some of my wire, and I'll just grab a little bit of that off there. And what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do, I am going to attach it to the end of that capacitor. So hopefully we've got enough flux everywhere here. I'm just going to get that, melt that coating off it, and then sit it there like that. Okay, now you can see that that wire is now attached to that pad, and then I'm just going to bend this around. I'll get another pair of tweezers, and I'm just going to bend it like that. So that, and then put some flux here, and Get some more solder onto the end of the soldering iron. Hold that still. And there we have it. I'm now just going to cut off the excess from this side, like that. I'm going to cut off the excess from this side, like that. And now we have this little extra wire here, just to make sure, just in case there are any contact problems inside there. And we'll get our multimeter once again, and we'll just check from there. You can't see that. I'm checking from there up to here. And we got beat, so we're good. Right, so I'm confident with that. When this board is clean, I'm then going to put a bunch of UV solder mask on that to help hold that in place, to make sure that, whoops, because if I give this a bit of a nudge, it's got a little bit of give, and I don't want that. I want that to be really rock solid. So, last capacitor, let's put him on. The oh so familiar process of grabbing a capacitor, plugging him on there, getting some solder onto the soldering iron, like this, boom, holding him in place, and there we go. Push him down one side, flip him around, and rinse and repeat. There we go. Okay, so that is all of the capacitors replaced. I can just go in and have a quick squeeze. You can see that I've just tidied up these joints. They're a lot neater now. We've got our little trace repair going on down here, and once I've had a chance to clean this board, I may even find other areas of problem, but at least we know we've definitely found those ones and repaired them. Here's a couple of little caps down here, once again all cleaned up and all out of focus. There we go, all those joints are all cleaned up. And so the next step now is that this needs to be cleaned. So I am going to put this into the ultrasonic cleaner to try and get rid of all this excess gunge. I'll get rid of all that dust and all that corrosion, and then we'll have another look at it under the microscope and just see if there are any other areas of concern. And then hopefully after that we can fire it up and it'll be working. Okay, so here is the board fresh out of the ultrasonic cleaner, and it looks a hell of a lot better than it did before. So let's have a quick look under the microscope. Okay, so let's start here, and this is obviously that area where we're looking at before, that comms slot that had all that green gunge, and as you can see it's all looking beautiful and clean now. And over here we have a little trace repair, and I am going to paint that over with some UV solder mask to help protect that. Up here we have the little repair that I did on that lifted pad, and then just overall as we look around you can just see the surface is much cleaner, a lot less gunk on here. There's a couple more caps there. Things obviously looking a lot better than they did before. So this is by no means a guarantee that this board is now fixed. I am feeling fairly good about it. So let's get some UV solder mask onto here first, because that's got to be protected. So I'll just grab my little paintbrush, get some mask on there, and then paint away. Just form that little bit of extra strength and extra focus. There we go. A little bit of extra strength around that repair. There we go, that's better. Got a bit more liberal on there. Okay, that's good. And then I want to do the same up here for my repaired capacitor as well, or repaired pad. So looking to just make sure everything is held on nice and firm. UV solder mask, one of the best ways to work is to not lay it on too thick. If you need a thicker coating, do it in multiple coats. It just dries a lot easier. If you do a thin coat, let it dry, then do another thin coat. So just don't go too heavy. Okay, there we go. And obviously this is the sound chip that we were looking at before, and as you can see it's all lovely and bright and clean now, where it used to be all revolting and grubby. Okay. Alright, well I think that's it. I'll just let that UV solder mask dry with a little bit of UV light, and then the next step will be to plug it in and see if it works. Okay, so the board has been repaired, it's been cleaned, and now we're going to test it out. So I've put it into this case, it's switched on, and let's test it. And there we have a lovely chime. So that's repaired, so that's great news. The old 580, unfortunately, is not one of the more collectible Macs out there. Certainly when you compare it to the 575, which came before it. On paper, the two of them look very, very similar. The same CPU, same speed, same resolution of screen, another all-in-one Mac. But the 575 has one huge advantage, and that is its logic board is smaller than the 580. And because of that, it can actually fit into a color classic. So people are very keen to get hold of the 575 so they can take the logic board out, put it into their color classic, and upgrade it to what's referred to as a mystic color classic. The 580 board can't go into the color classic, not without some serious modification to the case of the color classic. So for that reason, primarily, these ones are nowhere near as collectible, but still a nice little Mac. I do hope you've enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.